going to show CasAuth version 2 and how easy it is to get up an authentication server and then an API that's using that server for authentication. And we're just going to do that localhost for right now and show how quick and easy we can get up a solution. And then there will be later videos that show how to actually deploy that solution into some sort of production scenario. So I've got a new folder here. There's nothing in it. We're going to make a directory for auth, and we're going to make a directory for our API. We're going to go into the auth folder. We're going to do a .NET new web API, and that will create this from a template for us. And then if we look at our project file, we will see this is .NET Core 3.1. That version or higher is required. And then I will do a .NET add package CasAuth, which is our just NuGet package for CAS authentication. Okay, and now that is created. So now if I open up a new window in my VS Code, I can go to that authentication solution and we can take a look at it. We don't actually need any of the app settings or launch settings, so we can delete that. We don't actually even need any of the controllers. So we can delete all that, and we're left with just a totally bare bones project. So now if we go into startup, we can do using CasAuth, and for our services here, we can add our CasAuth services, or specifically our server authentication services. And down here, we don't need any of this. We don't even need the authorization. All we need is app use routing, app use cath server auth, and the endpoints. And that is it for setting up the startup. And then over under the project, or excuse me, under the program, we can add, we will need to use .env. So, .env. .env just allows us to create a .env file and put environment variables in it. And then we're also going to use CasAuth. Everything in CasAuth is configured via environment variable. All right, and there is going to be one environment variable that we actually care about right now that's not part of CasAuth, which is what port do we want to host the solution on? Because we're going to be running multiple applications here, our server and our client, and we can't obviously host those on the same name and port. So we are going to, oops. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay, get an environment variable that we're going to call host URL. But it turns out that on our environment variables for CasAuth, if we're using insecure defaults, there's already a localhost 5100 set up for our server host URL, so we can just use that. So we will look to see if we've specifically set a host URL environment variable, and if we haven't, we'll just use the one that comes by default with CasAuth. And then if our host URL is not null, we will tell Kestrel to start on that name and port. And then we need to actually tell .env to start and to look for a file called .env, which all those were the defaults anyway, but there we have it. Okay, so now we should have a solution that starts up, and we'll look for an set of environment variables and kick off on that port. And so now we just need to create a .env file which has our environment variables in it. The first one is just going to be log level, and this is not required, but I'm going to set the log level debug just so we have some better logging in case there's a problem. And then I'm going to do use insecure defaults true. And that is going to just use a whole bunch of insecure settings that just make getting a local environment up really easy because we don't have to generate any certificates or do anything else. And then I'm going to need a tenant ID and a client ID. So for that, I'm going to come over to Azure Active Directory to app registrations, and I'm going to create just call this plosnayapp01. I need to say where I'm going to redirect this to. I already mentioned this is going to run on port on localhost 5100. And then the endpoint that we always contact with our token is cas token. So we create that. There's one more tiny thing we need to set. Oops, under authentication, we need to turn on implicit grant for ID tokens only. That is required for the OIDC workflow. You don't ever want to turn on access tokens for implicit. That would be insecure, but for ID tokens, it's fine and required. And then now, if I come over here, I've got my tenant ID, my directory, and I've got my client ID. It's right there. And that's it. So I can save it. That's everything I'll need in order for my server to work. Should be everything I need. So let's run it and let's see how it works. Okay, great. So we're up and running on port 5100. Now the question is this actually working and doing anything? And to find that out, we can try and do a login. So I'm going to go to localhost/cas/authorize. And actually, before I do that, I want to bring up my developer tools. Okay, and I'm going to run. It's going to go through my authentication. It's going to see that I need to consent. And it's going to go through my full authentication flood Azure AD. I've already logged in on this window, as you saw before, because I was in the Azure portal, so I don't need to do anything there. You'll notice this redirected me back to localhost 5000, which is just the default for the insecure defaults for where my web application is going to be hosted. Of course, I haven't actually written a web application yet, so it's fine that we didn't find it. But the important part is this here, this /token endpoint. And it's important because you'll notice that we actually did set a cookie coming out of here that is this cookie right here, which should contain all of my, oops, if I go to JWT.io, should contain all of my authentication information. And it does. So here I'm logged in as the admin, and here's my OIDC number, or my my OID number, and that's really all I have in this token. But you can see the defaults for issuer and audience. So we did successfully authenticate, and that part of our work is done. So now let's do the same kind of thing for our API service, which is what I'm also calling the client. So this is the piece that's going to consume this. And so if we go under our folder again, and this time under our API, okay, we can create a new web API project, just like we did with the other one. Okay, that's perfect. And we can do .NET add package and CasAuth. Okay, and then I can again open up VS Code, go to my API. I can again get rid of all the launch settings and app settings. I'm not going to need any of that. This time I am going to leave my controllers because this is going to be an API, and it would be nice to have some endpoints to actually test with. I'm going to go to my startup here, and I'm going to do pretty much the same thing I did before. So I'm going to add services, but this time instead of the CAS server auth, I'm going to add CAS client auth. And down here, this time I do need routing, and I do need authentication, and I need authorization, and I need my CAS client auth. So CAS auth uses this, it just bolts into the standard authentication and authorization workflows for ASP NetCore. So we need to include those, and then it will pick up and add the endpoints and stuff that it needs. So that's all great. And then if we switch over to program, we can really just kind of copy. Oops. Sorry about that, wrong window. We can just copy what we had over here for program, and it'll be the exact same thing with the exception of our namespace is different. Our namespace is called API now, and rather than going to the server host URL, we'll default it to the client host URL, which that's going to be port 5200. And now all we need to do is create our environment variable for this. And again, the only real default we need is use insecure defaults. I am going to add one more to this though, which is verified token in header. So again, this is a setting you wouldn't typically turn on in production, but this is just going to allow us to send the token in a header instead of a cookie, which makes doing this through curl a lot easier. And so for testing, that's what we're going to do. So anyway, we can now start this up. And we're now running on port 5200. And so now what we want to be able to see is, can we actually pass our authentication that we got just a minute ago to this service, and will it work? And because we turned on allow it in the header, we can now do an authorization bearer token. We can grab this big token here, inject that, and we can create another. There's one other header we're going to have to inject here, which is for our cross-site request forgery. We generated this XSRF key, so I can grab that out of there, and that header is going to be called x-xsrf token, and I can inject that header there. And now I can go to localhost 5200 cas me, and the me endpoint is just going to show you the claims that are in this token that are not the standard claims that just are in all JWTs. So it's just, in our case, the name, admin, and the OIDC. So easy enough. And we'll notice we got a 200, so that all worked. Now let's actually take this just one little step further before I stop this demo, which is if we go into our API, we have this weather forecast controller we created. We can add the authorize keyword to either the controller or the endpoint. And now, if we just say right out to the console line, my name is, there will be a user object with claims, and there's a extension on there called name that we can pull the name. The name extension is actually part of CasAuth, so we need to add CasAuth. Okay, and so now we're just going to say this whole controller requires authentication, and my name is whatever. I'll have to pass it there. And so if I now curl my weather forecast endpoint. Oh, I didn't actually start the server, so let's start it up. Okay, running on port 5200. We'll try that request again, and now we get my name is admin. Obviously that came out of the token, so that's fantastic. And let's say we want to, I don't know, mess up our authentication. Right here, we'll stick a random couple of characters in there, and of course we're unauthorized. So perfect. So our authentication is working, and you know, we can actually get claims and everything out of the tokens. So that's really all you need to do to get CasAuth up and running locally. So look for more videos about doing this on a server, but it's super easy to get up and started.